The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver. Chapter 11. Dream Angels. In the third week of May, Luann got a job as a packer in the Red Hot Mama's salsa factory. This meant that she stood elbow to elbow with about 100 other people in a sweaty packing line, dicing chilies and tomatillos and crushing garlic cloves into moving vats, with so much salsa slopping onto the floor that by the end of the day it sloshed around their ankles. The few who hoped to preserve their footwear wore those clear old-fashioned rain boots that button on over your shoes. Most people gave up the effort. On days when they were packing extra hot, their ankles burned as if they were standing on red ant hills. The ones that handled the chilies grew accustomed to tingling fingertips and learned never to touch their eyes or private parts, or anyone else's, not even on their days off. No matter how they scrubbed their hands, the residue of Red Hot Mama had a way of sticking around as pesty and persistent as a chaperone at a high school dance. Truly, this was a sweatshop. Half the time the air conditioner didn't work at all, and all the times the fumes made everyone's eyes water so furiously that contact lenses could not be worn on the premises. Luann's vision was 20/20, so this wasn't a problem, nor was any of the rest of it for that matter. Luann loved her job. If Red Hot Mamas had given out enthusiastic employee awards, Luann would have needed a trophy case. She brought home samples and tried out recipes, some of which would even eventually be printed on the jar labels, and some of which would not, God willing. She gave us lectures on how the tiniest amount of cilantro could make or break the perfect salsa. 6 months ago, I'd never heard of salsa. Now I was eating it on anything from avocados to pot roast. It came in 3 speeds. The jars with green lids were mild, whereas pink meant hot. The red-lidded jars were so-called firecracker style. The latter was not a big hit with the kids. Turtle would cry and pant at just the slightest taste, fanning her tongue and eyeing Luann like she was some spy that had tried to poison us. Dwayne Ray had better sense than to let the stuff enter his mouth. "Enough already," I told Luann. "How about we just put the jar on the table and use the honor system?" On my nights to cook, I made the blandest things I could think of, broiled white fish and mashed potatoes and macaroni and cheese to give our taste buds a chance to grow back. But Luann had bought the company propaganda, hook, line, and sinker. "It's good for you," she said. "Some doctors recommend a teaspoon a day to prevent ulcers. Plus, it clears your sinuses." I informed Luann that, thank you very much, my sinuses had just about vacated the premises. Telling it this way, it sounds like a lot of fights, but actually I was liking Luann a great deal these days. In the few weeks since she'd started working, she had begun to cut her hair far less often, and finally stopped comparing her figure to various farm animals. Having a job of her own seemed to even out some of Luann's wrinkled edges. She mostly worked swing shift, which meant that she left at 3 in the afternoon, leaving the kids with Edna Poppy and Mrs. Parsons until I came home with a couple of hours later. For the longest time, Luann was scared to say 2 words to Edna for fear she might let slip some reference to eyes. Finally, I cleared the air, just stating right out to Edna that for a great while we hadn't realized she was blind, because she got on so well. Edna had just assumed we knew all along. She took it as a compliment, that it wasn't the first thing we'd noticed about her. Once she started swing shift, Luann's experimental family dinners, featuring 5-alarm casserole and so forth, were limited to her days off. Most of the time I fed the kids and put them to bed before Luann came home at 11. Then she and I would eat a late supper, or on nights when it was still too hot to look a plate of food in the eye, we'd sit at the kitchen table fanning ourselves in our underwear, reading the paper, and drinking iced coffee. Sleeping was hopeless anyway. But mostly we'd talk. At first, all she could ever talk about was cilantro and tomatillos and the people at Red Hot Mama's. But after a time, things got back to normal. She would leaf through the paper and read me all the disasters. Listen to this. Liberty, Kansas. The parents and doctor of severely deformed Siamese twins joined at the frontal lobe of the brain have been accused of attempting to murder the infants by withholding medical care. Lord, you can't really blame them, can you? I mean, what would you do? Is it better to be totally retarded and deformed and miserable, or just plain old dead? I honestly couldn't say, I said, not having been either one. Although, when I thought about it, being dead seemed a lot like not being born yet, and I hadn't especially minded that. But I didn't give it a lot of thought. I was interested in the weather forecast. We hadn't had a drop of rain since that double rainbow hailstorm back in January, and the whole world was looking parched. When you walked by a tree or a bush, it just looked like it ached somehow. I had to drag the water hose around to the back every day for Maddie's squash and beans. The noise of the cicadas was enough to drive you to homicide. Maddie said it was their love call, that they mated during the hottest, driest weeks of the year. But it was beyond belief that any creature, even another cicada, would be attracted by that sound. It was a high, screaming buzz, a sound that hurt your eyes and made your skin shrink, a sound in the same class with scratched-up phonograph records and squeaking chalk. Luann, who had lived here long enough to make the association, said the sound of the cicadas made her hot. For me, it went way beyond that. I used the air hose to blast the accursed insects out of the low branches of the Palo Verde trees around Maddie's, sending them diving and screaming off through the air like bottle rockets. Every time I walked past the mural of Jesus as Lord, I begged him for rain. But every day the paper said, no precipitation expected. Remember that time at the zoo? Luann asked, still occupied with the Liberty, Kansas horror, about those Siamese twins born pregnant or whatever it was? I remember the giant turtles, I said. Luann laughed. Now, how's a turtle managed to be pregnant, I'd like to know? Do they get maternity shells? I almost feel like going back to see how she's doing. Do you know what Esteban told me? I asked Luann. In Spanish, the way to say you have a baby is to say that you give it to the light. Isn't that nice? You give the baby to the light? Mm-hmm. I was reading a piece about earthquakes under the ocean. They cause giant waves, but in a ship you can't feel it at all. It just rolls under you. I twisted my hair into a knot to try and get it off my sweaty neck. I looked enviously at Luann's blonde head, cropped like a golf course. I was so sure Dwayne Ray was going to be a Siamese twin or something, she said, because I was so big. When he was born, I had to ask the doctor about 15 times if he was normal before it sunk in. I just couldn't believe he was okay. And now you just can't believe he's going to get through a day without strangling or drowning in an ice chest, I said, but in a nice way. I put down the paper and gave Luann my attention. Why do you think you're such a worrywart, if you don't mind my asking? Taylor, can I tell you something? Promise you won't tell anybody. Promise you won't laugh. Cross my heart. I had this dream 1 week after he was born. This angel came down, I guess from the sky. I didn't see that part. He was dressed kind of modern, in a suit, you know, with a brown tie, but he was an angel, I'm positive. He had wings, and he said, I was sent to you from the future of this planet. Then he told me my son would not live to see the year 2000. Luann, please. But no, that's not even the scariest part. The next morning my horoscope said, listen to the advice of a stranger. Now don't you think that's got to mean something? That part's real. It's not a dream. I cut it out and saved it. And Dwayne Ray said something about avoiding unnecessary travel, which I took to mean, you know, traveling through life. Not that you could avoid that. So what on earth was I supposed to do? It scared me to death. You were just looking for a disaster, that's all. You can't deny you hunt for them, Luann, even in the paper. If you look hard enough, you can always come up with what you want. Am I just completely screwed up, Taylor, or what? I've always been this way. My brother and I used to play this game when we were little with a cigar box. That box was our best toy. It had this slinky lady in a long red dress on the inside of the lid with her dress slit way up to here. It's a wonder Granny Logan didn't confiscate it. She was holding out a cigar, I think. I suppose she was a Kino girl or something, but we said she was a gypsy. We'd make believe that you could say to her, "Myself at the age of 14, or whatever age, you know, and then we'd look in the box and pretend we could see what we looked like. My brother would go all the way up to 90. He'd say, "I see myself with a long beard. I live in a large white house with 17 dogs," and on and on. He loved dogs, see, and Mama and Granny would only let him have just Buster. But me, I was such a chicken liver, I'd just go a couple of weeks into the future at the very most. I'd look at myself the day school was going to start, in September maybe, and say, "I am wearing a new pink dress." But I'd never go up even to 20 or 25. I was scared. Of what? That I'd be dead. That I'd look in the box and see myself dead. But it was just pretend. You could have seen yourself any way you wanted to. I know it, but that's what I thought I'd see. Isn't that the most ridiculous thing? Maybe it was because of your father. Maybe you got kind of hung up on death because of him dying. I'm just totally screwed up. That's all there is to it. No, Luann, you had your good points too. Usually Luann spit out compliments you tried to feed her like some kind of a nasty pill, but that night her blue eyes were practically pleading with me. What good points? She wanted to know. Oh, gosh, tons of them, I faltered. It's not that it was a hard question, but I was caught off guard. I thought a minute. The flip side of worrying too much is just not caring. If you see what I mean, I explained. Dwayne Ray will always know that, no matter what, you're never going to neglect him. You'll never just sit around and let him dehydrate or grow up without a personality or anything like that. And that would be ever so much worse. You read about it happening in the paper all the time. I mean it. She did. Somebody forgetting a baby in a car or letting it roast or some such thing. If anything, Luann, you're just too good of a mother. She shook her head. I'm just a total screwed up person, she said, and now I'm doing the same thing to poor Dwayne Ray. But I can't help it, Taylor. I can't. If I could see the future, if somebody offered to show me a picture of Dwayne Ray in the year 2001, I swear I wouldn't look. Well, nobody's going to, I said gently, so you don't have to worry about it. There's no such thing as dream angels, only in the Bible, and that was totally another story. In June, a package came from Montana, all cheery and colorful with stamps and purple postage marks. It contained, among other things, a pair of child-sized cowboy boots, still years too big for Dwayne Ray, and a beautiful calfskin belt for Luann. It was carved or stamped somehow with acorns, oak leaves, and her name. There was also a red and black Indian-headed hair clip, which was of course no use to Luann at this particular point in the life of her hair. Angel had changed his mind about the divorce. He missed her. He wanted her to come up and live in Montana in something called a yurt. If that was not an acceptable option, then he would come back to Tucson to live with her. What in the heck is a yurt anyway? Luann asked. It sounds like dirt. Beats me, I said. Look it up. She did. A circular domed tent of skins stretched over a lattice framework, she read, pronouncing each word slowly without a Kentucky accent. She pronounced A like the letter A, used by the Mongol nomads of Siberia. As they say in the papers, I withheld comment. So what do you think, Taylor? Do you think it would have a floor or plaster walls inside? Anything like that? Think the bugs would get in? What popped into my head was George eats old gray rutabagas and plasters his yurt. The part I can't get over is that he asked for me, she said. He actually says here that he misses me. She mulled it over and over, twisting her gold wedding band around her finger. She had stopped wearing it about the time she started working at the salsa factory, but now had put it on again, almost guiltily, as though Angel might have packed a spy into the box along with the belt and the boots. But I've got responsibilities now, she argued with herself, certainly because I was giving no advice one way or the other at Red Hot Mama's. This was surely true. In just 3 weeks' time, she had been promoted to floor manager, setting some kind of company record, but she refused to see this as proof that she was a good worker. They just didn't have anybody else to do it, she insisted. Practically everybody there is 15 years old or worse. Sometimes they send over retardeds from that helpless program or whatever the heck it's called. It's called the Help Yourself program, and you know it, so don't try to change the subject. The word is handicapped, not retardeds. Right, that's what I meant. What about that woman you told me about that breeds Pekingese and drives a baby blue Trans Am? What's her name? That gave you the I Heart My Cat bumper stickers. And what about the guy that's building a hot air blimp in his backyard? Are they 15? No. She was flipping in the dictionary open and closed, staring out the window. And Sal Monelli, how old's he? Luann rolled her eyes. Sal Monelli was an unfortunate fellow whose name had struck such terror in her heart she forbade him to touch any food item that wasn't sealed and crated. Luann's life was ruled by the fear of salmonella, to the extent that she claimed the only safe way to eat potato salad was to stick your head in the refrigerator and eat it in there. He actually wants me to go, she kept repeating, and even though she said she wasn't going to make up her mind right away, I felt in my bones that sooner or later she'd go. If I knew Luann, she would go. It seemed like the world was coming apart at the gussets. Maddie was gone more than she was home these days, bird watching. Terry, the red-haired doctor, had moved to the Navajo reservation up north to work, not because he had head rights. Father William looked like he had what people in Pittman called a case of the nerves. The last time I'd really had a chance to talk with Maddie, she said there was trouble in the air. Esperanza and Estefan were going to have to be moved to a safe house farther from the border. The two best possibilities were Oregon and Oklahoma. Flat, hopeless Oklahoma. What would happen if they stayed here? I asked. Immigration is making noises. They could come in and arrest them and they'd be deported before you even had time to sit down and think about it. Here? I asked. They would come into your house? Maddie said yes. She also said, as I knew very well, that in that case Estefan's and Esperanza's lives wouldn't be worth a plugged nickel. That just can't be right, I said, that they would do that to a person, knowing they'd be killed. There's got to be some other way. The only legal way a person from Guatemala can stay here is if they can prove in court that their life was in danger when they left. But they were, Maddie, and you know it. You know what happened to them, to Esperanza's brother and all. I didn't say to their daughter. I wondered if Maddie knew, but of course she would have to. Their own say-so is no good. They have to have hard proof, pictures, and documents. She picked up a white wall, and I thought she was going to throw it across the lot, but she only hoisted it onto the top of a pile beside me. When people run for their lives, they frequently neglect to bring along their file cabinets of evidence, she said. Maddie wasn't often bitter, but when she was, she was. I didn't want to believe the world could be so unjust, but of course it was right there in front of my nose. If the truth was a snake, it would have bitten me a long time ago. It would have had me for dinner.